Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Lisanti, the Director of Sales at Beere&Purves. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar. We know this is literally the busiest time in our industry and you have a lot going on your plate. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started, and that is everyone is on mute and off webcam, so you can relax. We do welcome questions, so please type them in during the presentation. I'll address them at the end. We are keeping this webinar to 30 minutes, so if we do run out of time, I will personally circle back to you and answer your question. And of course, if anything comes up after this presentation that you thought of, please reach out to your Beere&Purves sales team. We've got Karina, Nick, Pat, Brooke, and of course myself. So I will go ahead and answer the number one question we always get. We are going to send out a copy of these slides and a copy of this recording to the attendees. So you don't have to worry about that, but go ahead and type in any other questions you have. And then I want to just start with big picture, where we got to this from. So there were two massive federal legislative pieces of body work that got passed in 2020 as a result of COVID. The second one was the CAA, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, that was actually signed a year ago by then President Trump at the time. And that piece of work, like I said, it's massive. It's about 6,000 pages and it encompasses a lot of topics. The pieces that touch our industry are more, the intent, I should say, is to bring more transparency to the industry. And it affects, a wide variety of parties. So it affects providers, carriers, brokers and consultants, etc. But what we're going to be focusing on today is literally just about 5 pages of that massive federal legislation that affects broker and consultant compensation disclosure rules that are hitting at the end of this month. So that's picture where we are. So the agenda today is we're going to do a quick overview of the legislation. Again, just the 5 pages, not the 6,000 pages. Who needs to disclose, what needs to be disclosed, when disclosures need to be made, how to make disclosures, if there's potential penalties, and there are, just so you know, tips for your agency, and then the resources B&P's put together to help you guys. So of course, we always start with a disclaimer on fun legislative webinars, and that is, this is for informational purposes. We're not legal or tax professionals, so please always defer to the professionals on the details. And then I do want to point out that although this was passed a year ago, the Department of Labor has not released their FAQ specific to the group compensation yet. They have on the individual side, they have for a lot of the transparency for the providers and the carriers, et cetera, but not specific to the group yet. And so if and when they do, we'll certainly reach out and let you know. So an overview, again, it's the CAA that led us to where we are with this, and it's the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And what it's doing is it's actually amending ERISA. And so it's actually bringing the compensation disclosure that hit the financial industry about in 2012 over to our side of the world, the ERISA health plan world. So that's what's happening big picture. This is affecting any ERISA health plans. And remember, when ERISA says quote unquote health plans, they don't just mean medical, they actually mean medical, dental, potential HSA, HRA, etc. We'll talk more about that in a future slide. And this slide is just a quick overview. We're going to dive more into all these topics in future slides here. So who's being affected is going to be all size groups, small group, large group, fully insured, self-insured, etc. And what's going on is if you provide broker or consulting services, which we identify in a slide, which if you work with B&P and your employee benefits broker, you probably do. You need to disclose what those services are you're providing to your group if you make a certain amount of revenue off that group. And so if you make $1,000 or more for the year, not per month and not per line of coverage, in total for the year for the group with either direct compensation, so say like commission, or indirect, so for example, carrier bonus program, you need to disclose to the client what services you provide and what you're being paid for that specific group. There's different ways outlined of how you can disclose that information. We have some tips for you. So you can do a set dollar amount. You can say this is the dollar amount I make off you. The problem with that is, right, in California, especially in small group and large group for the most part as well, you're paid a percentage. What happens if they hire employees or term employees? That set dollar amount would change through the year. So you're better off listing either a percentage or a per employee per month commission if you make it that way, etc. And when does this all start? As I said, this was signed into legislation a year ago by President Trump, and it hits December 27th of this month, 1 year later after the legislative body was signed. Now, what does that exactly mean? Does it mean it's going to hit your 1/1 renewals, et cetera? We'll talk about that too. So this is just big picture. Again, this law is changing ERISA on the health plans to where you have to disclose your services and what compensation you receive, direct and indirect, if it's $1,000 or more. And in the state of California, if you've got a 2-life medical case for group, you're probably receiving $1,000 of commission for the year for that client, and then you add on, say, potential dental, vision, other lines of coverage. So probably this is affecting all your small group clients, unless you only have maybe the dental or vision on it, not the medical, then maybe you don't. But it might be just a good policy to put this in place for all your group clients. So to level set, here's some definitions. So the first one is a covered plan. So again, this is ERISA, and it's the health plans, medical, which includes medical, dental, vision, HRA, FSA, and we added this because this came up a lot after the last webinar 2 weeks ago, is it does not apply to most accepted benefits. And accepted benefits are like disability, cancer only, hospital indemnity, workers' comp, things like that. So for those lines of coverage, you don't have to disclose the services you're providing and the comp. I mean, I'm sure you can. It can't hurt as long as you're clear so that they can evaluate what services and what compensation you're being receiving for the actual covered plans. A covered service provider, that's actually you. So that's someone that enters into a contract or an arrangement, and it can be a specific or implied arrangement for a group. I don't know how many small group brokers, for example, have an actual service contract that you have your client sign in order to start working with them. You might get a broker record initially, or just that's implied contract by you working with them, marketing their information, answering questions, deciding which plans are going to go through, et cetera, and then helping them with implementation and the ongoing services. So the covered service provider is probably you, a broker or consultant. The covered services are brokerage and consulting services, which we do have outlined in the next slide. So we'll cover those in a second. And then indirect compensation, direct compensation is directly from the covered plan, and think of that as like your commission directly from the carrier. But you're also supposed to disclose indirect compensation as well. And that can be like carrier bonuses. If you're getting commission on, say, a third-party administrator that you put into that group, on FSA or HSA or something like that. It also is supposed to include non-monetary compensation of $250 in aggregate. So what that means is if you think of if a carrier takes you to a nice dinner, takes you to a ball game, that probably easily gets to $250, and you're supposed to disclose to all your clients with that carrier that what you made. And the problem with this, we'll talk about it, is that you're supposed to disclose ahead of time, so you probably don't know in 2022 how many dinners or games you're going to go to, for example, or what gifts you're going to get from a carrier, et cetera. So just heads up. So who is required to disclose? So it is the covered service provider, which is, we said that would be a broker or consultant, if you're making $1,000 or more for the year for that policy, not by line of coverage, not by month, etc. Again, $1,000 in total for that group, then you need to disclose. And what are broker and consulting services? So they're identified here on the screen. I'm not going to read through all of them. You can see them. I'll give me a second. But look at the first one there. So this is probably the one that encompasses all of you, and that is the selection, development, implementation of plan designs. And then you can see you probably provide more services that are listed here, or at least that one. So that's what a broker consulting services is defined as. So when to disclose? So the big difference with this body of legislation is you're supposed to tell your client ahead of time how much money you're going to be making off that group. So this is different than a 5,500 where you're telling them after the fact how much you did make off that group. So that's the big difference. This is prospective. It's ahead of time, not reactive. So and it has to be reasonable of what you think you're going to make. You know, it can't be not realistic at all. It applies starting December 27th of this month, of this year, 2021. So we'll talk more about what that means. Does this affect all your 1-1 business that you're working fast and furious on probably right now as we speak? So it depends on if you have a service agreement, what date that is on. If it's prior to December 27th of 2021, then it would not apply this year, but it would apply next year because this is annual. Maybe you don't do an official service agreement that you have your client sign, but maybe you got broker record, or maybe this has been your client for 10 years. In October, you got the 1-1 rates, you reached out to them, you marketed it, you presented it to them, they made their decision. This year, they're going to move from one carrier to another. You did the meetings, you collected the material, you already sent it to Beere&Purves for processing. That 1-1 renewal is, everyone's understanding is kind of put to bed at that point. So you did that before December 27th. So you don't have to disclose to that 1-1 renewal what you're making this year. You would at the next renewal. So when this goes into effect might be your 2-1 renewals if you haven't kind of had those group decisions, working with the client, etc. We all know that you can have that friend that calls you on, December 28th, the day after this goes into play, and says, hey, I need insurance for 1-1. And we all know that the submission deadlines for our medical carriers in small group California are well into the effective month of at least the 5th business day, or sometimes even more. So you could still give your friend insurance for January 1st, even if they call you on December 28th. But in that scenario, since you didn't even start the conversation prior to December 27th, I do believe you would need to disclose this year what you're going to be making off of that specific client for this and what services you're outlining or providing for that client. So FYI, hopefully that helps with when this goes into play, which groups you have to send this to now or down the road. So we talked about the definition of a contract or an arrangement. That would be if you actually have a contract, that date, or a broker record, or when you kind of made the decisions for this renewal. That would kind of define that is the general understanding. Again, it is an annual disclosure, not just one and done. And be aware, in the small group market at least, that sometimes different lines of coverage for a group have different effective dates. So maybe you move the medical to December, back when we were grandmothering all the groups back in the day. So at that point in time, you would have a December renewal, but maybe the dental is July. And so maybe you talk to that client 2 times during the year. And so you would need to disclose what you're gonna be making off the dental back in July. And then now you'd be disclosing the medical, assuming this is a future year after December 27th of 2021. If they're really close and you have one conversation where they make their decisions all at once, even though technically they're 2 different effective dates, you can probably put this to bed with one disclosure because you're doing both at one time, even though they're technically 2 different dates. And then be aware, so you need to disclose this, after December 27th of this year, once you're making those decisions. If you've disclosed and you find out you made a mistake, you have 30 days to correct the information. If there's a change along the way, so perfect example, sometimes carriers come out with these great carrier broker bonus programs throughout the year, and they'll retro it back to say January of 2022, and they've come out with it in say July. You would at that point have 60 days to notice the client of a change. I didn't tell you about this. Now there's this carrier broker bonus program, and your group might, I might qualify because of you. Again, this is ahead of time, so that's the problem, is you're telling them ahead of time what you think you might, be making off of them. You might not know for sure, other than that flat commission, for example. The other thing is anytime your client requests it, you have 90 days to disclose it. So again, 30 days if you make a mistake, 60 days if there's a change throughout that year, plan year, and then 90 days at any point in time that they request it. All right, what must be disclosed? So first of all, it's important is you're providing the services you're providing to that group so that they know what you're giving them and what you're being paid for. Because really the other piece of this, we're talking about your responsibility. The other piece of this is the plan is supposed to look at the services you're providing and look at what the compensation you're receiving for them, and then they're responsible to determine if it's reasonable or not. And the irony, at least in the small group market, the 1 to 100, on the medical side at least, the commissions are the commissions. You can't ask for more, you can't ask for less. They are built into the book rates, so they are what they are. So even if your client were to look and say, I don't think this is reasonable, you make too much money on this case, you couldn't decrease it. I mean, I guess they could go to a different broker or consultant that they feel is providing more services for what they're getting paid, but you can't change your commission. Small group. Large group, different story. Other lines of coverage, different story. So it is important to identify on the disclosure if you are the plan fiduciary. It is very uncommon that the broker consultant is the plan fiduciary. So definitely you probably aren't. If you are, you should know that. If you don't know, you probably aren't. So, but that has to be in the disclosure, so be aware. And then you again have to outline any direct compensation, any indirect compensation, again, what you think you're going to be making for the plan for the year. And then you can see there's other items listed here. And some of the things that are in this legislation actually kind of don't necessarily make sense for our industry because it's really copying that financial services industry disclosure that they had to start doing in 2012. So some of the verbiage doesn't really necessarily match our industry. All right, so some of the examples, and this is just some examples that you might be putting on that disclosure to your client of the services you're providing are placement of insurance, enrollment, Ben admin system. So again, you can't necessarily have just a cookie cutter list of services you're providing to all your groups because they might vary. You might be giving a Ben admin system, an online enrollment system to maybe larger groups or some groups, but maybe not all your groups. So if you're not giving them a Ben admin system, you shouldn't have it listed the services you're providing. So FYIs, they do need to be custom disclosures per the group to really mirror what you're providing for that specific group, and then the compensation you're receiving for that specific group. Account management might be services you're providing, plan servicing, compliance, consulting, referrals, etc. So this is, again, just a list. You probably have more. It just needs to be custom to that group when you disclose what you're actually providing to that specific group. All right, how to describe compensation. And there's a variety you can do. You could do a set dollar amount. You can do a formula, so say a percentage of premium, like you get paid probably 5% on your small group medical at least. And then you can do a per capita, so per employee per month commission, for example, like the level funded products pay you on. So it's probably better to do the second and third bullet point, whatever applies to the group, so that you're not saying a set dollar amount, and if that changes, if they have adds or deletes, they have to go back and change. And you can use other methods as long as it's deemed reasonable. All right, so how to deliver, there's not a lot of guidance in the legislation about this, so we'll see if the Department of Labor comes out with anything, but really you can email, soft copy's fine, mail, hard copy, provide in person. You just want to have some documentation of it because you're bound to disclose this. And then it does not have to be signed by the client. It might be a good idea to have the client sign it, or some people are putting verbiage on the disclosure that says, hey, if you don't sign and return this in 10 or 14 days, it's implied that you understood it and agreed, that's reasonable. So whatever again, the client does not have to sign, but it's probably a good idea or can be a good idea. So some reminders. I haven't really talked about it today yet, but the real purpose of this legislation is, again, to bring transparency into the industry at all levels. So at the provider, at the carrier, at the broker consultant level, and your piece is really to help the plan fiduciary deem if what you're being paid is reasonable. So there's an onus on the group to have some responsibility here. So you're supposed to provide those services you're providing to that specific group and what you're going to be making on the group, assuming you're making $1,000 or more for the group. And then the group needs to decide if it's reasonable. Again, the irony, at least in small group medical, is you can't change your commission. In the state of California, it's built into the rates. You probably want to identify that to the group that it's just set commissions on the medical side. So just be aware. But it's really, you're helping the plan do their part to be in compliance with ERISA is the big picture. What's going on is, again, you're helping your group be in compliance with ERISA, but they can't be in compliance if you don't do your part. So that's why there could be some penalties on both sides, which leads me to penalties. So the plan fiduciary and the coverage service provider, meaning the broker or consultant, may face penalties. It's a potential. And there's civil enforcement, there's civil penalties under ERISA, there's an additional 20% if there's a settlement or court judgment about it. And it is assumed that the Department of Labor, when they start when they do those random audits that are so fun to go through, that they're probably going to start requiring or requesting the broker compensation disclosures as part of their audit, so FYI. And then, everyone asks when there's penalties, well, how are they going to find out about it? It comes to those audits. Again, the group might report if you haven't provided what you need in that 90 days of the request, because they're really going to have penalties on their side if they don't do it what they need to do. I'm sure brokers might be out there prospecting, hey, did your broker tell you about this? Because, oh, they didn't, they're supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. We see that in the marketplace all the time, right? All right, so some tips. So again, you can use this to your advantage. Remind your client of everything you do for them. They probably don't remember or like kind of think it all through, everything you've provided for them. So use this as a sales, way to remind them of everything you do for the compensation you do receive. And then you need to educate, of course, yourself, what you're doing, and your staff, so that everyone can answer questions when they get those disclosures. You're not caught off guard and they know what to say. Have a plan. You need to go through your book of business, find out which groups you need to do this on. I'm assuming all the way probably down to all 2-life medical cases, depending on the plans they provide to their client. You're probably going to be earning $1,000 or more in direct and indirect compensation. So it's probably all your small group and up employee benefits, assuming it's a RISA plan. And then you should have a template so that, it's not everyone's using different things. You do need to customize it per group. So again, if you're not providing that Ben admin system to your 2-life case, then, don't put Ben admin system on there, for example. And then you should keep a copy of what you provided the client, especially, if there's ever a Department of Labor audit or, you're ever asked, you have that documentation. So here are the resources that Beere&Purves put together, and we will be sending a link to all these. So there's a quick summary so that you can explain what this is to the employers, because they might not know. And again, the whole point of this is the employer is supposed to be doing something on their end. They are responsible to determine if what the services you're providing are reasonable based on the commission or revenue you're receiving from them. There's a longer summary for you, so you can be versed in it, but feel free to ask any of us any questions. We did put together a disclosure template that you can work off of. Again, just, you want to customize it per group, and then you'll want to put probably, like, for example, medical, you're getting paid 5% commission. The dental and vision, you're getting paid 10% commission versus a set dollar amount is what we would recommend. And then you need to remember that you have to go by which carrier and when you wrote that group for the broker commission and bonuses. So Beere&Purves put together on our website the link to all the current commissions for all the lines of coverage that we sell here at Beere&Purves. But remember, if you sold a group with, say, Anthem 20 years ago, that was probably on a different commission schedule. And Anthem, for example, is great about not changing the commission schedule once you write the case. It's locked into whatever it was at the time. And so that commission schedule for that group that's been with Anthem for 20 years is probably on a different, well, I know for a fact they're on a different commission schedule than for a group that you're going to write for 1/1 of 2022. Which is a flat 5%. So we put together some tools to help remind you of what the current commission schedules are for our carriers, our lines of coverage, et cetera. And then some of the carriers are coming out with resources, so we just have links to those as well. Both Kaiser and UHC have come out with specific group information. I'm not sure if I said it today or not, but individual comp has to be disclosed as well, but the onus to disclose it is on the carrier. And the Department of Labor has given FAQs on that, so FYI. The carriers are not responsible for providing any direct or indirect compensation to groups, to ERISA health plans. That's your responsibility. They are trying to make sure you know where to find your commission information, et cetera, so that you can do your job, but they're not responsible for doing it on the group side, but they are on the individual side. All right, so I think that is everything, and then we actually have some time, so I will open up some questions if there are any questions. And there are, so 1 second here. Just have to make it a little bigger so I can read it. All right. Let's see, so if you have a 1/1 renewal and they change to a new carrier and the contract does not get signed until after December 27th, do you need to disclose this year? So the common understanding is The date is really set by when you decided to move to that carrier, when you decided what plans you're going to be offering to the group, et cetera. So if it doesn't really matter, like a technical signature date on a piece of paper is really more when the decisions are made, when you can point to that. And so, maybe you have an email where the client's saying, hey, thanks, this is what we're decided to do this year. We're going to move over to United Healthcare or Kaiser or whatever, et cetera. So it doesn't determine by the effective date and necessarily the date the forms are signed, unless you do have a true service agreement that you have with your client. I would say go by that date. So hopefully that answers that question. Sorry, my questions are moving up on me here. All right. Who do you address the disclosure at the group? And I have had that question a couple times. Good question. So whoever the plan fiduciary at the group is, and you probably can't, disclose it to not enough people. So, but whoever you're working with, that's really the owner, the plan fiduciary for that ERISA plan at the company is who it technically should go to, but probably can't hurt to give it to others as well. The HR person, president, et cetera. Okay, what if our client doesn't think our commission percentage is fair? Then what? We can't change it. So, well, that's exactly, good question. At least on the small group medical, you can't change it. So I think you need to explain that in your disclosure that, hey, I get paid flat 5% commission, for example, right now on most medical cases in small group, and I can't change it. So I think it's just having that conversation. In terms of indirect compensation, meals, ball games, et cetera, how can the amount be tied to a specific account? So with that, it's an aggregate. So, if you sell a big case with a carrier and they take you out to dinner to celebrate, it doesn't necessarily mean that where, oh, well, that dinner was specific for ABC group. It's really what indirect comp you think you're going to get for the upcoming year, which is hard to guess, right? You probably don't know what you're going to be invited to yet, but technically that's the way it's written as we understand it today. So it's in aggregate, whatever the carrier provides for you in the upcoming year, and then really what people are saying is you should then divide that or notify all the groups that are with that carrier, assuming it totaled $250 or more. So hopefully that makes sense, but a little tricky, I think, on indirect comp for things like that because you really don't know ahead of time. All right, I think I will give it another second or so, but I think those are all the questions that I see. I could be wrong. I was wrong. Do you think this is the start of small group commissions to become negotiated? I don't know how that works. My understanding is that, small group medical, I know I keep honing in on that, but that's kind of the biggest thing you get paid on, the medical piece, and those rates are filed with the state of California and they can't be changed. I think if you were to be filed, but I think you have to be with the state of California, someone to receive fees maybe. So I can't, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if that's going to come down the pike, but currently the way it is now is small group medicals in those book rates, you can't change it. So I don't know if it will change or not. Again, this is federal legislation that we're talking about. So who knows what, California ever does. Do GAs need to disclose? That's an excellent question. Our understanding at this point in time is we're really an extension of the carrier, and so we don't. The relationship with the group is with you and the group, not us and the group. The only caveat to that is Beere&Purves doesn't do that, but I understand some GAs will actually co-broker groups with you, and if they are receiving direct compensation on a group, on your client with you, then they should certainly disclose because it's exactly, they're just like you at that point in time. But we have a GA override. We're behind the scenes, an extension of the carrier. And so things could change. We'll keep you posted, but that's the current understanding at this point in time. Seems small group carriers would love to eliminate commissions. Well, I don't know. I don't think so. I think they do bring, I know at least our carrier partners really do have the value of the broker in mind. So they do value you guys, and they know you need to get paid fairly in order to do so. Okay, and then just a question, thanks. Oh, we're going, still more. But one more minute, so let's see here. Oh, maybe that is it. No. Okay, I do think that is it. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope everyone has a very healthy, happy, safe holiday season. Make sure, I know it's the busiest time of our year, but hopefully you can find time to relax and let B&B help you. If you have any one-on-one business, we'd love to help you with it. So thank you very much, guys, and take care.